You can work out every day and still have hip pain, and this is usually why. When I get patients who experience hip pain after sitting for at least 8 hours a day, one of the things that I often hear is that they'll be confused because they'll say that they train or work out multiple times a week, sometimes every day of the week, and they focus on different things. So, for example, they'll work on flexibility, mobility, they'll work on strength training, even cardio, and they'll pretty much share with me that they don't understand why they're constantly having this hip pain if they're so active and they're doing the appropriate stretching and the appropriate strengthening for the different muscle groups and the joints for the hips, the knees, the trunk. And they've been dealing with this hip pain for a long period of time, but yet they're still living an active and healthy lifestyle, right? Now, one of the things that I'll go over with them is, especially with a lot of the jobs or individuals like students in school, where a lot of the time we spend is in a sitting position. If you imagine when you're sitting, usually we're going to have our hips flexed or bent to like a 90-degree position. So what happens a lot of times when we stay in these positions for hours at a time, we'll get what we call adaptive shortening. So essentially the muscles of your hips, so for example like your hip flexors, will be in a shortened or contracted position, and they'll adapt to that position and kind of stay in that shortened or tight position because you're in that spot for too long. Now as we get out of it, then what you're doing is you're kind of stretching that muscle after it's been contracted for a lengthy period of time. So one of the ways that we try to combat that is, okay, let's increase the frequency of how often you're getting up and changing your position, because I have worked with individuals who said, yeah, I sit for at least 6 hours straight of just staying in that position, not getting up, not even going to the bathroom. In terms of worst case scenario, most of the people that I worked with, they'll say, usually it's like maybe 3-4 hours of sitting and then they'll go do their business. But I've heard worse as like 6 hours of just continuous sitting, just at work, right? Now, the reason why we want to focus on increasing how often we're getting up and changing position is, as I mentioned earlier, when you get this adaptive shortening, a lot of the muscles of not just the hips, but also the knees and also the back, they'll get, they'll change their length. They'll get a little bit more tight. And that's just with the sitting that we do for work or for school. And if you think about commuting, when we're sitting in the car, our hips are now also in that same exact position where your hips are bent to 90 degrees and they're in a shortened position. So it's another opportunity for the muscles to contract and get short, right? And then if you're at home, like done with your work day, done with your school day, now some people, if you sit on the couch, if you sit at another desk, now you add even more hours of time just being in that shortened contracted position, and you multiply that by how many days a week and how many weeks and months over time, those muscles are going to stay in a shortened and contracted position. And what happens is when they're tight and shortened, they're going to be pulling on where they attach on your body, right? So for example, like your hip flexors, because they're going to be shortened, they're going to be pulling at the lower lumbar spine, which is going to cause your low back to arch. It's going to change the position of your pelvis and your trunk, your lower back. So if that's not addressed, then as you fast forward a few years, that's when you start to experience chronic back pain, chronic hip pain. And on top of that, if you add in, you continued working out, working on squats, lunges, especially if you're doing a lot of compound and heavy movements, now you're working with muscles that may have asymmetry and definitely deficits in terms of muscle length, right? So then you might be moving improperly. Your coordination, your mechanics will be slightly off, if not significantly off, if you allow these muscles to stay in this tight and shortened position. So the reason why we want to address just daily habits is what you do in the gym. Let's say for most people, let's give them the benefit of the doubt of that they're working out 2 hours a day, right? Let's say that's an hour and a half of strength training, and let's give them half an hour or to an hour of flexibility, mobility work, working on training asymmetries in terms of muscle strength and muscle length, and then you do that every day. That's still not enough out of your day to day for the whole week to counteract the 8+ hours. Usually that's going to be 12+ hours of just sitting, right? So 2 hours of your day working on undoing the work or the essentially damage that is being caused by something that you do 8 to 12 hours of your day. The balance is just not there. You can't it's essentially like you can't outwork a bad diet. You can't undo the damage you're doing by just sitting excessively, right? So one of the things I make a mandatory habit for myself, for example, is every hour, the bare minimum, just stand up, just get those muscles, get those joints into a different position, different range of motion, just so you can reduce the amount of adaptive shortening. Okay, so that's the main thing that you can work on. Obviously, there are stretches, there are strengthening and mobility exercises that can address specific structures in terms of muscles and soft tissue, but bare minimum, trying to get up once every hour, and then if you can do some walking or some mobility or stretching in between or during those breaks, that's even better. Thanks for watching. If you found that video helpful, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.